right, so skill 13 is called pause and think about commas. And it's a little bit of a play on words because the idea is that commas don't always show a pause, and you have to think about the rules of commas. Commas aren't probably the most common mistake that students make until the very end. It's like the last thing that gets mastered because there are a bunch of different ways that you can use commas, and there are a bunch of different ways that they can be tricky, and that it seems like you should have one, but you shouldn't, and vice versa. So you just have to practice, you have to get to know the rules, and you have to be able to apply them consistently. Just a little story. Most students like me, I used to love commas. When I was writing papers in high school, I would put them all over the place. Most of them were totally misplaced and did absolutely nothing. And this is really common for early writers as you're beginning to master the use of commas. After my English teachers used several gallons of red ink correcting me, I learned that a common piece of advice was wrong. You can't put a comma wherever there's a pause in a sentence. You have to know the rules. The idea isn't completely ridiculous, but it gets it backwards. When there's a comma in a sentence, it's an indication to pause briefly when reading it aloud. Think about the difference in cadence when you read, finally, the teen in the movie was able to escape the masked villain, as opposed to, final girls are the ones who beat the villain at the end of the movie, right? This comma is telling us to pause after finally. You don't want to pause after final girls because it's a phrase. It doesn't go the other way, and that's the thing. Just because you would pause in a given place when reading a sentence doesn't mean there should be a comma, okay? That would mean that different people would put commas in different places, and it would be totally subjective, and they wouldn't ask questions about it, okay? So the basic idea is you should ask what a comma is doing in a sentence, and if it's doing what it's supposed to do. And if it's not, you take it out. And if it has to be there because it follows a rule, you put it in. Some of these ideas we'll go through in a minute. It could be setting off extra information. It might be part of a list. It might be doing something else, but it has to be doing something. And that's the real key. When you come across a question where there are a couple of answers and they put commas in all different places, you have to ask, is it doing something? If you can't justify what the comma is doing, don't use it, all right? So here's the list. These are basically the 6 things that on the ACT, commas are doing, okay? A comma comes before a fanboy's word to separate 2 independent clauses. John walked to the store, comma, but he slipped on a banana peel. Okay? Comma, but. But is a fanboy's word. A comma comes after an introductory phrase. Although he liked pizza, comma, he rarely ate it. Introduction. In 1919, comma, World War I ended. Introduction. Commas separate items on a list. No one ever gets these wrong. They're easy. You're fine. Commas can come between adjectives. The old, dilapidated house needed to be demolished. This is a little tricky because there are some adjectives where you don't put commas, okay? If the adjectives are basically describing each other, then like the gray flannel suit. Well, the gray is talking about the flannel, and the flannel is talking about the suit, so you don't put a comma. In this case, both of these adjectives are talking about the house. It's an old house. It's a dilapidated house. So there you have to put a comma between them. Commas set off non-essential phrases. Paula, who was only 8 years old, climbed Mount Everest. Okay, that's not true. But this phrase is non-essential. You don't need it there. You can say Paula climbed Mount Everest. This is telling us more about Paula in a way that does not have to be there in the sentence. And then last, commas set off transition words. Mike, however, was a Mets fan, right? And you need commas around the however on both sides. In some cases, you can have a semicolon before the however and a comma afterwards if it's an independent clause on both sides, but it's not here. So there are a lot of little things to get used to, and you get used to it mostly by practicing and doing questions, okay? And there will be some questions for you to try in the next lesson. The general rule of thumb. If you get it down to 2 answers, and they are the same, except one has a comma where the other one doesn't, if you really just don't know, then don't choose the comma. 9 out of 10 times, students choose answers with too many commas, not too few. So if you get it down to 2, choose the one with fewer commas. That's probably the the takeaway. But again, it's plan B. Plan A is know the rules.